With classes being back in session, parents are once again tasked with a challenge of transporting their kids to and from school. Ideally, kids should be able to handle transportation on their own by walking or biking to school, and in neighborhoods with wide, ample sidewalks and protected bike lanes, they actually can. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to have this option. Some people may live in a location that is close to the school, but due to a lack of sidewalks and heavy vehicle traffic, parents may feel uneasy about having their child walk a short distance. At further distances, riding a bike isn't much of an option either because of a lack of bike infrastructure. I, as an adult, do not want to ride in painted gutters, so I highly doubt parents would want their children to ride in them as well. When walking or biking isn't feasible due to safety concerns or distance, there may be an option to take the bus. Unfortunately, due to the national bus driver shortage, this may not be an option. Carson City and Washoe County in particular are unable to provide normal service, so they instead split the area into 4 different districts, and each week one of those zones will not have bus service. Washoe County has even offered to reimburse parents 60 cents per mile as a way of incentivizing them to drive their kids to school. This is essentially burdening parents with transportation because children who would normally be able to take the bus are now having to seek out rides from their parents or other people who may be able to help them. I have even heard stories of parents working together to carpool each other's children just to make sure everyone can get to wherever they are going during the bus driver shortage. This really got me thinking about how much children rely on being driven and how much time parents spend shuttling their children around. A lot of parents start off their morning by getting into a line of cars so they can slowly pull forward to the drop-off zone and bring their kid to school. According to a customer survey from the rideshare service Hop Skip Drive, 51% of parents spend at least 5 hours a week driving their kids around. Survey participants also noted that having to drive their kids somewhere regularly disrupts their work, with 42% feeling that they have to put their job at risk to meet transportation needs. All of this just because our transportation system is built around driving and offers no other alternative. There is some truth to the soccer mom stereotype. A parent may have the sole duty of driving an SUV as they haul their children to and from school, extracurricular activities, events, friends' houses, and whatever else. It's rather absurd. Nobody should have to drive a car to raise a child. But with the way our cities are built, it is something that is forced onto a lot of parents. The fundamental problem is that children lack independent mobility, meaning they are unable to get around the cities they live in without the assistance of their parents or caretakers. In addition to hiring more bus drivers and paying them enough to reflect the value of their labor, cities that are facing difficulties with getting children to and from school must implement infrastructure that makes parents feel more comfortable with having their children walk or ride bikes to school. Doing so would ease the burden of transportation from parents and would also provide numerous benefits to the child's development. According to the 2017 study, Prevalence of Children Walking to School and Related Barriers, about 1 in 6 parents have their youngest child walk to or from school once a week, with the most common barriers being distance, followed by traffic safety, weather, crime, and school policy that forbids walking. It is important to note that the distance is not really the issue here. A different study titled U.S. School Travel, an Assessment of Trends, found a majority of children would walk when the school is less than a quarter mile away, but prevalence would decrease as distance increased, with only 15% of elementary and middle schoolers walking when distances are over half a mile. A half-mile walk is not that far away. It can be traversed in about 10 minutes. Children at these distances aren't shifting to riding their bikes either because there is no substantial increase in bike ridership at greater distances. Furthermore, there has been a steady decline in walking and biking to school overall. In 1969, 12.2% of elementary and middle schoolers were driven, and 47.7% walked or biked. As of 2009, those metrics have essentially reversed. About 12.7% of elementary and middle school students walked or biked, while 45.3% were driven. There are more children being driven now than there were decades ago. The real problem here is the anti-pedestrian infrastructure that makes walking and riding bikes feel incredibly hostile. The second largest barrier is traffic safety, because the infrastructure prioritizes the throughput of cars over the safety of people. Reno and Sparks in particular are reportedly among the most dangerous cities for pedestrians, due to having a high rate of drivers who fail to yield for pedestrians. It doesn't matter if it's a stroad at the end of town or an in-and-out next to an apartment complex, drivers are looking out for other cars, not other people. It is astonishing just how dangerous it is to cross an intersection. You could narrowly be run over by someone making a right turn on red, someone making a left turn and not noticing you, or someone speeding through a red light. You could also be cut off by someone pulling forward and blocking the crosswalk. It is disturbing just how dangerous it is to be a pedestrian. And in the biggest insult, people will blame you if you get hit by a car. These safety issues deter parents from willingly sending their children to school by themselves. Ironically, when parents shuttle their children to protect them from outside traffic dangers, they are actually just adding one more car to the problem. Keep in mind that this is only an issue with cars. Public transit, bikes, and walking do not add nearly as many perceived dangers as cars do. Since parents generally spend a lot of time shuttling their children around, they may be more inclined to having their kid learn how to drive the moment they turn 16, so they can have a bit of a break from being the family chauffeur, and they can start giving their child a bit more independent mobility. Teenage drivers are especially unique in adding one more car to the problem because they tend to be far worse drivers than adults. When comparing crash rates per mile, teenagers 16 to 19 years old have more crashes and fatal crashes per mile than adults do. In fact, the fatality rates from motor vehicle crashes are so high that it is the leading cause of death among female teenagers and one of the leading causes among male teenagers. The reason is because of immaturity and inexperience. Overconfident teenagers may speed, make the wrong decisions, or drive with passengers who end up distracting them. Driving being the only way to experience independent mobility makes our cities more dangerous by having an increased number of teenagers who are frankly bad drivers. Adolescents shouldn't be driving until they're at an age where they can comprehend the dangers and responsibilities that come with driving a car. In the meantime, there must be adequate alternatives. Breaking down the barriers that prevent children from walking or biking requires radical changes to the way our cities are built, so parents can feel more comfortable with allowing their children to walk or ride bikes around the city that they live in. This means having pedestrian infrastructure with complete streets, traffic calming that prioritizes safety instead of speed, and enough density in mixed-use developments that points of interest are never too far away. This also means having contiguous bike infrastructure that is not a painted gutter. A proper barrier, meaning a bollard or concrete barrier and not a flex post, would provide ample protection so parents can have the peace of mind that infrastructure exists to protect vulnerable road users. Safety is paramount for allowing children to be independent. Parents must have the peace of mind that nothing bad will happen to their child if they are allowed to experience the neighborhood on their own. One way to achieve this is to simply have more people around. Jane Jacobs describes a concept called eyes on the street in the second chapter of her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She believes people feel safe when others are around because people can naturally survey the area when there is something to draw them to it. Bringing more people into a location requires ample sidewalks, attractive spaces, and a variety of points of interest. Jane Jacobs essentially describes the opposite of suburban communities. The suburbs are designed to isolate people, and it forces them to drive every time they wish to go somewhere. These communities may feel eerily devoid of people despite there being a lot of cars, because cars passing through a location does not instill the same level of comfort as human activity such as socializing, eating, playing, and plenty of others. The book, Children's Active Transportation, uses a variety of different studies to delve into the implications of designing a neighborhood that is meant to be inviting for people. If a neighborhood is believed to be safe, meaning it is safe from traffic, has safe streets and sidewalks, and it is safe for the child, it would feel more inviting and friendlier. Communities with these traits tend to have a lot of children playing, people walking, talking, and doing outdoor activities. An environment that encourages being outside also has a lot of health benefits. As this book states, physical activity is one of the most important health behaviors. In children and adolescents, the benefits of regular physical activity include cardiovascular and metabolic health, healthy bone and muscle development, maintenance of healthy body weight, and mental well-being. Simply walking to school increases how much physical activity a child may receive, and it's especially important throughout high school when there are fewer opportunities for physical activity. Parents also have an important role in reinforcing physical activity in their children. When they are an active caregiver who participates in walking or biking, it increases the chances of girls walking or biking to school. More active caregivers can be role models of a healthy lifestyle. Consequently, they may have more familiarity with the neighborhood, and they may be more likely to grant children independent mobility in comparison to inactive caregivers. Basically, as parents explore a neighborhood with their children get a better sense of where everything in the neighborhood is, and it is easier to trust that they won't get lost if they were to go outside on their own. When a child is being driven around all the time, they are unable to actually learn about their environment. This study, titled Freedom of Movement and Environmental Knowledge in Elementary School Children, had several children draw the route that they took from home to a nearby school. Child A walked on his own and was able to create a fairly detailed map pointing out plenty of different key locations. Child B walked with a parent, and they were still able to point out several locations along the route. Child C was driven, and their map looked like this. It's kind of sad. They got the starting location and the turns wrong, despite being only 2 blocks away. It sort of implies that they don't know much about their neighborhood beyond their own front yard, and they don't even know where that front yard is. Children who go to school on their own or with their peers are better at identifying landmarks, and they are also more likely than the other 2 groups to be allowed to go outside and play with their friends. Other studies have concluded that children who are more independent play with their peers more often, while children who are sheltered may feel lonelier in comparison. Parents may deny their less independent child the opportunity to play with friends or to participate in events or even to just go somewhere because they are too tired to keep driving them around. If a community is safe enough for the child to traverse on their own, they would simply be able to bike or walk to wherever they wish to go, and they wouldn't have to worry about whether or not everything coincides with their parents' schedules. This is why it is crucial for children to have independent mobility. The car-centric design choices within our neighborhoods essentially robs children of much-needed experiences. It creates the conditions where everything they may want to do requires a car to access them, and because of that, they may be unfamiliar with the world that lies beyond their front yard. It makes our neighborhoods feel weirdly empty despite there being a lot of cars going through them, and it burdens adults because they end up having to spend absurd amounts of time simply driving their kids around. The bus driver shortage is so much worse than it actually has to be, and it wouldn't affect as many people if there weren't so many children who relied on being driven. The trade-off of making it so cars can go everywhere is that children can't seem to go anywhere anymore. Easing the burden of transportation and allowing children to live more fulfilling childhoods can be done if we focused on revising our cities so cars aren't the dominant form of transportation. These changes would also have a ripple effect that would make our cities feel safer, more accessible, and more inviting to everyone. Children aren't the only group of people who benefit from design choices that provide people with more independent mobility. This includes elderly people who can no longer drive, people with disabilities that prevent them from operating a vehicle, people who cannot afford a car, and plenty of other demographics whose mobility is limited by car-centric urban planning. When you build a city that provides children independent mobility, you're really providing it to everyone.